Hello, welcome to Quackalope, and today I'm taking a look at a brand new game on Kickstarter, Folding Space. Now this is published by Maple Games, and I do want to give a special thank you to Maple Games for not only sending me a prototype version, but also sponsoring this how to play video. So I can let you all know exactly how this game plays, and you all can make a decision on whether or not this game is right for you and your family. What you see before me here is the complete setup Folding Space game. I have a video on exactly how this game sets up. You're welcome to click the link in the description to go take a look at it. If you're here on this video, however, we're going to talk about exactly how this game plays. Now remember, the copy of the game that I have before me here is a prototype copy of the game. So some of the pieces are nice quality paper that are cut out. A lot of the components are still variable. I don't have the pirate ship display pieces to set up and fly around the board. Instead, I'm using little wooden cubes to indicate where each one of my ships are. So the artwork, the design, and even some of the rules mechanics are still being tweaked and adjusted. The intent of this video is to give you a general sense and an overview of exactly how this game will play. And so a lot of elements will be fine-tuned, upgraded, and adjusted by the time it actually gets a full print release. So Folding Space is a game where you're soaring across the rings and moons of Saturn, collecting resources, collecting upgrades, using your player infinity boards to cycle through action phases, engage your boosters and movement icons, get your weapons ready to duel. This is a game that involves and encourages a high degree of interaction and a moderate degree of strategy and resource/movement manipulation. On the board here, you're going to see Saturn, the outer ring with 3 smaller moons, and a circular playing track. The outer moons are each 1 space away and have more valuable resources. Over here on the corner, we're going to have our Jolly Roger tokens, which are kind of the game clock. We're going to have our albatross birds, which are negative victory points for being a little bit too heavy-handed with your weapons. We're going to have our player infinity boards up here in the top corner, which I'll show you how you use in just a moment. And we're going to have our 4 stacks of cards here. Over here we have the wheel, the cannon, the sword, and the pistol, and every player should have 4 in their hand when they start the game. On these individual moons, we have 3 different types of tokens. These large square ones are going to be permanent upgrades for your player boards. These other large tokens with the planets on them are going to be territory control tokens that you gather in pairs to try to score some extra victory points at the end of the game. And these smaller round icons here are going to be different resources and icons that you can gather as well. At the very start of the game, 3 random cards will be played down, indicating which items or extra victory point modifiers are going to be active for this session. For instance, here we have the person with the most yellow crystals will gain 22 victory points. Players with the highest variety of map tokens, and then lastly, the player with the most green glass resources. So these 3 cards are used as a final scoring element of the game. Now the gameplay is going to consist of 7 rounds with 5 phases for each round, and each round is tracked by these Jolly Roger tokens that you have shuffled, stacked, and set over to the side of your board. The 5 phases are going to be the fold phase, the equip phase, the sail phase, the fight phase, and the ship shape phase. At the start of the fold phase around the table, you're going to take your infinity playing board and pass it to the person sitting on your left. I don't have anyone sitting to my left, so I'll pass it to myself. The player with the first player token is then going to start counting down from 10, as slow or fast as they would like. We're pirates here. We don't quite play by the rules. Everyone's going to start moving and manipulating their board, looking for the perfect combination of resources, icons, weapons, Jolly Roger tokens, and movement abilities. As the first player starts to count down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The moment they've reached 10, you're done, frozen. You put your board down, you put your hands over it, and you wait for the next phase to begin. The next phase is going to be the equip phase. That's where we go through our boards and we look at all the different weapon types and hand out cards related to each one of them. I'll put 2 player boards out here so we can compare exactly what 2 players might have. So we'll start the equip phase by looking at swords, cannons, and pistols. Starting with this player, I have 1 sword here and I have 2 swords over here. I have 4 cannons versus 2 cannons and 4 pistols versus 2 pistols. For each one of these resources, if you have the most of one resource out of everyone at the table, you're going to take 2 of those cards. So for instance, I have 1 here and 2 over here. So this player could take 2 of the sword cards. So because this player had the highest, they would earn 2 sword cards from the deck. Now if this was a tie, let's say both had 2, every player that ties would receive 1 card. The same would be true for the cannons and the pistols. So for instance, this player here would get 2 pistols and another 2 cannons. These are going to be cards that you use to both collect resources, but primarily battle at the different moons for control of the territory and for the right to be the first person to plunder that location. I'll set these cards back over into the side. So after you've gone through those 3 icons, you're going to check for the Jolly Roger tokens. Here I have 1, and here I have 1 as well. Let me change this board up just a little bit so that instead of 1, it actually has 2. In a case of a tie, you'd take 1 Jolly Roger token from the top of the stack, and you just set it off and over to the side. Only 1 Jolly Roger token ever gets either handed out or put back in the box every round of the game. If, however, one player has more Jolly Roger icons than anyone sitting around the table, they would get the Jolly Roger token that you've taken from the top of the stack. This is going to have a specific and individualized modifier on it. For instance, here, move a ship into a battle, self or opponent. So this token, when used and played, will allow you to manipulate either your ship or another ship's movement ability, giving you a slight advantage on determining where they are and when and how you engage in battle with them. I'll set this back over to the side, and we'll start looking at the movement phase. In the movement phase, you're going to make checks very similar to how we just did with each weapon. However, here we're going to make sure we follow a very specific order. We're going to check for white sails, blue engines, and pink boosters in that order. We're going to start with white sails, looking for whichever player has the most white sails. This player here has 2, this player here has none. Whichever player or players have the most white sails will get to move 1 space. They can move up to here, they can follow the rings of Saturn and start moving from planet to planet, but they can only move 1 space. Unless, however, they discard a wheel card from their hand. Now you can collect wheel cards by either winning battles or choosing them to be one of the resources you collect from a planet's location. Wheel cards, just like your weapon cards, are going to have a number value on the backside. That'll be used during the battle phase. Wheel cards are going to be wild cards that can be used in any battle condition type. That being said, wheel cards are also going to be used as movement options. So if this player had the most white sails, they could move 1 space. But if they wanted to move 2, they could go ahead and discard any number of wheel cards and modify their movement by that number. So for instance, if they had 1 or 2 in their hand, they could go ahead and discard 2 wheel cards and move up to 3 spaces. You never have to use your move action. You could always pause and remain stationed at the planet you're at. However, if white sails come up and you have the most, that's your one opportunity to move. If you pass, you won't get a second go around. The next icon we're going to look at are going to be the blue engines. Here, both players have 2 blue engines. But because the white sail player already either moved or had the opportunity to move, they won't be considered for this round. So in this 2-board setup, this player over here will be the only one considered. With 2 blue engines, they have the most. That means they can move up to 2 spaces or more if they use a wheel card to modify their movement. Lastly, we're going to look at pink boosters. Again, we only consider ships and player boards who haven't moved or had the opportunity to move yet. If you have the most pink boosters, you'll then get to move up to 3 spaces. If at the end of the phase you haven't had the opportunity to move at all because you haven't had the most white sails, pink boosters, or blue engines, you'll receive 1 wild wheel card. This will allow you to either modify your movement immediately or add it to your deck for later use. If you had the opportunity to move but you chose to stay in place, you do not receive one of these wild wheel cards. One other important note about the movement: you can only ever have 2 ships on a single location because those 2 ships will engage in conflict. So if there is 2 ships already at a location, you could move past them. However, you cannot stop on that location, and you cannot stop on any space travel locations in between zones. Every moon on this board is 1 space away, but in the final version of the game, some of them will be a few spaces apart. You would need enough movement to make it the full distance to your destination. You can't stop in the middle of space in between movement phases. After the movement phase has been resolved, you'll move on to the fight phase. This is where you'll engage in battle with one of your fellow pirates using the cards that you've been collecting over the course of the turn. Each planet will have an indication of what card type can be used. For instance, here we have swords, here we have cannons, and here we have pistols. The outer moons will have some very specific modifiers on them unique to each outer moon. For instance, over here at Re, you can only use swords and cannon cards. You can't use pistols. These inner moons are going to be one for each card type. So the battle I have right here are going to be sword cards. Every fight is going to have exactly 2 laws. First, you must follow the fight restrictions shown on each planet or moon that you're on. And second, you may never play a card to tie your opponent purposefully. So the way a battle is going to happen, when you arrive on a moon, let's say this player token just landed on the moon that the other player was already on. They're going to be the aggressor of the battle, and so they play first. You each start by playing 1 card at a time. So for instance, the aggressor will play a 2, the defender will come back and play a 5. Maybe the aggressor follows up a little bit softer, plays another 2, and the defender decides to go heavy-handed and drops another 5. This will go back and forth until one or both parties decide that they either can't play a card or they're done with the battle and they're ready to pass. The winner is going to be whoever has the highest point value at the end of the battle. The aggressor in a battle is at a little bit of a disadvantage because they play the very first card, which means if they decide to pass, the defender will have an opportunity to respond one final time and possibly squeak out that victory that they need. Now whoever wins, in this case it would be the far card here, whoever wins the battle will have to determine 2 things. First, they'll have to determine the final scores on the card. If they win by 1 point, that's perfect. That's exactly where they want to be. That means they played their hand exactly right. But if they win by 2, 3, 4, or 5 or more, an albatross is going to start following them around. The albatross is a negative point scoring mechanic for someone that is a little too heavy-handed or a little too aggressive right off the bat. For instance, this person here played 10 versus 4, meaning they played 6 points above where they needed to play, and this other player pulled back and said, look, I'm done battling. That means the 5+ albatross would come over there to this player's board. It has a -13 token on it, which is terrible. You don't want to end up with a -13 on the final victory scoring conditions. Now, it's not a concern as long as more battles happen. If anyone else scores 5 or above, even after a player has received one of these albatross birds, they're going to change positions. The other player, whoever scores it next, will take those negative points into themselves. So it's not a problem as long as you can get the bird to fly away. The next thing the victor will need to determine is which resources they would like to take from the planet they were just on. Whether they want the upgrade token, the planet map tokens, or some of these resources. The player who wins the encounter will get to pick 3 of these icons. The player who loses will get to pick 2. As long as they used a card during the battle. If they decided to never play a card throughout the battle, they won't get to plunder any of the resources. Now, one important note, these permanent upgrade tiles never get restocked, so you might want to grab them as early as possible. A player can also choose to receive one of these wheel cards as a reward for winning the battle. Now, for the players that are all alone here, not engaged in a battle for this phase, they'll spend one of the 3 resource card types from their hand to plunder a single item from those locations. Now those items could be the upgrade tokens, the map tokens, or the resource tokens, depending on what they'd like. But this game really incentivizes you to butt heads with other players at strategic moments when it's the right time to engage, because you have a massive opportunity to receive a lot of rewards for a successful victory. After the final battle has been resolved and everyone's done their plunder actions, it's time for the final cleanup and the beginning of the next phase. You'll set all of your used cards over to the side in a discard pile. You'll take a random token from the token bag and add 1 to each resource pool on the planets. The maps and the permanent upgrades never get restocked. And then you'll go over here to your Jolly Roger tokens and determine if the game is ending or if you have another round. As long as you still have a token remaining in the stack, you'll start again at the fold phase. Once again, you'll hand your infinity board to the player sitting next to you on your left. You'll rotate the first player token and they'll begin the count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you begin again, collecting resources, flying around the board, engaging in battles, plundering resources and map icons, permanent upgrades, and at the end of the game, calculating your score and figuring out who has the most victory points. The way you're going to calculate your victory points is fairly simple. Anytime you see a diamond symbol with a number inside of it, those are going to be victory points. So every one of these resource icons are corresponding victory points. Every one of these planet icons also have victory points on top of them, and the 3 cards that we laid out at the very start of the game are also victory point scoring conditions. Over here, whoever has the most yellow crystals will score additional victory points down there in the bottom right corner. Whoever has the biggest variation, or whatever variation of map icons you have, you'll score corresponding victory points. And then finally, whoever has the most green glass will score 15 victory points. You'll add up all of the numbers that you have in front of you, and you'll determine who is the conquering pirate. And in essence, that's the game. Like I said, this is a prototype copy, and all the components are still being shifted and adjusted and fine-tuned, and some of the rules may have slight variations or changes by the time it actually gets into your hands. Whatever the case, I hope you've enjoyed this Quackalope how-to. I hope you found it informative and it's helped you understand exactly how folding space works and some of the components that make folding space something special. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be sure to respond with any questions you might have. Whatever the case, remember to do the important thing. Get out there and play some games. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me.